building upon the idea that your emotions are signals. They're signals that communicate to your soul the proper ethic of which you are supposed to aspire to. And that when you encounter novelty, God has given you a heart and a soul so that you can respond to novelty, you can respond to the unknown properly. Now, if you are captured by an idea, if you are captured by an ideology, essentially, you will not be able to respond to novelty because you will have to bring every novel thing into the captivity of that which you already understand. And we have spoken about this before as an internal echo chamber. Now, this is the fallacy that many people have fallen into, that they believe the construction of a perfect logic is how someone would attain themselves unto God, not understanding that that logic is built upon the ethics that God has given them through their soul, and that ethics has an underlying emotion attached to it. I could not argue for something that you find emotionally reprehensible, but people, when captured by ideologies, think the World War II, have committed terrible atrocities because the logic has driven them there, whereas you think the emotion would take them there. If we go back to the Garden of Eden, right, we find that Eve is very fearful. She's very fearful of going against the commandment of the Lord, okay? But when the emotion is gone, when the fear has left her, her logic takes over and she desires something that is good for food, that looks nice, and that can make someone wise. So she succumbs to the knowledge of Lucifer because she forfeits the emotions that God had given her. I want that to be a framework for you of understanding how you must tap back in to the true inspiration that would enable you to understand the world in a different way than we do now. We have framed reality in a way that is not cohesive with what we experience. We think of things in a machine-like behavior when we are not machines. No one behaves like a machine, but when someone says something, or it jets to especially a religious ideology, the answer is given in a systematic, formulaic way in which I can nullify what has been said logically, even though emotionally I know it to be wrong. I think of this so readily and apparent with some obvious doctrines, but instead of having to be specific, think for yourself, imagine for yourself something that you understand to be reprehensibly evil. For instance, the giving of money to an institution in order to deliver someone from hell, right? You know intuitively the problems with something like that, and that it is so incredibly incohesive with what Scripture teaches. Most of Jesus Christ's ministry, he's reprimanding the rich and the wealthy, and when asked about taxes, he said, "You give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's." Meaning he looked at a piece of money, like us looking at a dollar bill and seeing a picture of George Washington on it, or Benjamin Franklin, right? He looked at a piece of money, it had the inscription of Caesar, and he says, "You give that to Caesar. And then you give to God what is God's." Meaning that God has nothing to do with this. These two things are completely unrelated. Now, they were baffled by that answer. So tapping back into what we said in our last video, everything is something. That's the essence of it. That was the example that we gave about the chair, right? Everything is something, and then everything means something. So when I said in the last video that I was not trying to connect you to the essence of God, I'm not trying to tell you how tall God is. I'm not trying to tell you what his hair color is. I'm not trying to tell you what his favorite song is. I'm not trying to lay out the physical diameters of God or heaven or the things of God. And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to say in a discrediting way, hey, we shouldn't talk about these things. I think that those things are over talked about. You have a handful of verses in your entire Bible regarding the physical dimensions of heaven. They're vastly over discussed. The things that are vastly over discussed throughout most of the Bible, especially when it comes to prophecy, are the physical dimensions of those things. We would say that as the raw essence. Essentially, it is like me telling you the chair has 4 legs, right? The chair having 4 legs is far less meaningful than me telling you that my grandfather hand-built that chair after he got back from World War II for my grandmother as a gift for the nursery of her first child. Do you see the depth by which one indicates more than the other and informs more than the other? Well, that essentially is the problem that we're running into. We've lost meaning because we are trying to derive meaning from essence instead of trying to derive meaning from significance, right? It's very difficult to understand that because sometimes what we find the most significant is whatever we find to be the most relevant. And what is most relevant to most people is the obvious, right? It is more relevant and obvious to me that the chair has 4 legs than it is that the chair would have this deep, rich, emotional heritage behind it. Okay? So if you can think of it like an illusion, there are physical illusions in the world. Okay? And when you're watching a physical illusion, you're always aware that even though you do not understand or maybe can explain what is happening, that it is by nature an illusion, and that is what you are watching. Okay? The problem is we don't notice the cognitive illusions. So you see how, like, if you're more equipped to deal with the cognitive illusion, the physical illusion becomes less dangerous. If you have no ability to deal with the cognitive illusion, you will lose all capacity to unravel the novel, which is where we land today. The cognitive illusion that's been erected within the church is that somehow I would attain unto God through the most strict adherence to the most properly defined doctrines. And not that you shouldn't want to know what is true and not true concerning Scripture, but what I'm saying is that it has not arrived us at the door of heaven. It has not brought us there. And there's many different variations of this to prove that it has not brought us there. You have extreme fundamentalist. And when I say extreme fundamentalist, I am not meaning radical people who would do things that are illegal and wrong. That's not what I mean. I mean people who are the most stringently adhering to the strictest interpretations of Scripture. Okay? So you have variations of this throughout all different denominations within Christendom. And none of them seem to have tapped in to this eternal vein by which they would foster genuine inspiration. And the reason I say that is because when you look at how people respond to these concepts, they respond to them the same way that the Jews responded to Jesus Christ when he went to heal Jairus' daughter. Okay? He goes to the house. The young lady is obviously dead. And the Jews know that she is dead. They have come into this house to grieve with this man whose daughter is passed. And Christ says, "Fear not, she sleepeth." And in the middle of a wake, they begin to laugh and mock God to scorn. Imagine being so captured by an ideology and what you know that you would mock the God of heaven to his face. There could be nothing more inappropriate to do physically in the setting that you're doing. But the reason that you're behaving inappropriately in that physical setting anyway is because you are defining the world through what you think or understand physically. And because that is what you know, that is all you see. There is no possibility within those people that are gathered there that Christ is about to raise this young lady from the dead, even though he has done countless miracles up to this point. But yet, if I look at Abraham, Before he goes up to the mountain to sacrifice Isaac, he tells his servants, I and the lad will return. How does Abraham, with no evidence of there ever having been a resurrection, believe God enough to know that he would resurrect his son? Meanwhile, the Jews, with countless evidences of a resurrection, cannot even entertain the idea when the very God of heaven is in the room with them. This is the danger of allowing logic to lead the dance when it comes to your relationship with God. I am not saying that all of emotions are good. I am saying that God will try to communicate to you through your heart. And it is not going to be the way in which your head thinks it's going to happen.